The Crumbling Marriage Cake, The Inversion of Matrimonial Ends, Putting the Frosting Before the Cake. By Chris D. Introduction. The Metaphysics of the Marital Cake. In the modern church, we face a crisis of the family. Divorce, falling birth rates, and declarations of nullity issued on a scale that would have astonished earlier generations. Sociologists can measure the symptoms. The root error is metaphysical. Catholics no longer agree about what marriage is. The simplest picture is a cake. The cake is the primary end, the procreation and education of children, the objective child-directed order that explains marriage's permanent, exclusive male and female form. The frosting is the secondary goods, mutual aid, conjugal love, unity, companionship, and the remedy of concupiscence, the lawful quieting of disordered desire within marriage. The image needs one qualification. The cake is not a baby actually conceived or a numerical quota of children. It is marriage's real ordering to the procreation and education of children. A sterile couple can possess that order fully, while a fertile couple can deliberately organize married life against it. The frosting is good. It sweetens the work, steadies the household, and helps husband and wife carry their duties humanely. But it belongs on the cake. A cake without frosting is plain, but still a cake. Frosting without cake is not a cake at all. The modern inversion makes adult unity the substance of marriage and the child one beautiful expression of that unity. Once that happens, the child may be welcomed, postponed, or refused without touching the supposed essence. The frosting has become the meal. Here is the claim. Marriage has one primary end and real but subordinate secondary ends, not two co-equal masters. Part 1. The Ingredients, Nature, and Grace. To understand marriage, we must begin with the ingredients supplied by nature, not with the feelings supplied by the spouses. Aquinas calls marriage an officium naturae, an office of nature, in the Summa Theologiae, supplement, question 41. An office is a stable charge with work proper to it. Its duties do not appear and disappear with the office holder's mood. Why does nature establish this office? Human reproduction is sexed, and human children remain dependent for years. A child needs not merely to be begotten, but to be fed, reared, corrected, educated, and formed for God. He therefore needs a definite father and mother joined in a stable household. A thought experiment makes the point quickly. Imagine rational beings who reproduced alone, perhaps by division or budding. Would there still be love and friendship? Yes. Could people share homes, work, affection, and mutual aid? Yes. Would there be a natural reason for a permanent, exclusive male and female contract? No. Marriage exists as a distinct institution because a child arises from man and woman and cannot raise himself. Love may explain why this man chooses this woman. Only the procreative and educative end fully explains why the institution binding them must be male and female, exclusive, permanent, and public. The child is not the customer purchasing a marital product. He is the claimant whose helplessness gives the union its shape. The crucial distinction. Grace perfects nature. A modern error may be called the sacramental assumption, the belief that a sacramental marriage must prove itself by visible holiness, emotional communion, or spiritual warmth, so that a cold or bitter marriage begins to look invalid. That confuses the failure to live a marriage with the failure to contract one. The 1917 Code, Canon 1012, says Christ elevated the very contract of marriage between baptized persons to the dignity of a sacrament. It then states the consequence. Between baptized persons, a valid matrimonial contract cannot exist without being by that fact a sacrament. There are not two marriages, a natural contract below and a spiritual communion floating above it. The contract itself is raised. Here the leaven image belongs. Grace is like leaven working in dough. It does not replace the dough or hover above an empty pan. It raises what is already there. Grace strengthens husband and wife to keep the bond, fulfill justice, grow in charity, and bear the long labor of the child-directed household. Grace is not the frosting. The frosting names created secondary goods within marriage. Grace belongs to the supernatural order. The point of leaven is narrower. Grace perfects the same natural contract rather than replacing its object and ends with emotional warmth, total self-gift, or felt spiritual fruit. A valid marriage may be badly lived. Coldness may prove sin, neglect, suffering, or resisted grace. By itself, it does not prove that no bond arose. Part 2. The old recipe card. The picture is new, the doctrine is not. The 1917 Code of Canon Law, Canon 1013, Paragraph 1, states the order in one line. Finis primarius matrimonius procreatio atque educatio prolis, secundarius mutuum, adiutorium, et remedium concupiscentiae. The primary end of marriage is the procreation and education of children. The secondary end is mutual help and the remedy of concupiscence. Notice the hierarchy. The canon does not offer two equal pillars. It distinguishes the cake from the frosting. Pius XIII repeats the same order in Casti Connubii, paragraph 17 and 59. Mutual aid, the cultivation of mutual love, and the quieting of concupiscence are genuine goods, but spouses may seek them only while they remain subordinated to the primary end. Subordinated is the controlling word. The Roman Catechism's treatment of matrimony says the natural contract had for its object the propagation of the human race, and among Christians, the procreation and education of a people in the worship of the true God. An older catechetical summary puts the household duty plainly. Husband and wife must remain faithful and provide for the spiritual and temporal welfare of the children God gives them in my Catholic faith. The remedy of concupiscence is therefore functional frosting. It protects chastity and helps guard the household against illicit desire. Mutual aid carries the family through sickness, poverty, work, and age. Conjugal love makes long duties humane. These goods do not merely decorate marriage, but neither do they become the purpose of the bakery. Aquinas is exact about the order. In Supplement Question 49, Article 3, he says, "Sacrament is the most excellent marriage good because grace exceeds nature. Indissolubility is more essential when the goods are considered in their actual existence, since marriage can exist without children actually born. But offspring, considered in its principle as the intention accepting marriage's child-directed order, is the most essential thing in marriage. Sacramental dignity is higher in excellence, while offspring remains the governing natural end." Pius XV also supplies the apparent countertext. He says the spouses' mutual formation in virtue may, in a broad sense, be called the chief reason and purpose of matrimony, in Casti Connubii, Parv 24. But he immediately distinguishes marriage broadly considered as the whole common life from marriage in the restricted institutional sense, where proper conception and education of the child govern. Mutual sanctification may describe the highest work lived within marriage without becoming the primary end that defines what marriage is. The Holy Office closed the equal ends escape in 1944. Asked whether the secondary ends could be equally first and independent, it answered no, in its decree on the ends of marriage. An independent secondary end is no longer a servant, it is a rival government. Part 3. The Two Masters. Why does the distinction between primary and secondary matter? Because alleged equals reveal their real rank when they conflict. Our Lord said, "No man can serve two masters." Matthew 6:24. He spoke of God and mammon, so the verse illustrates rather than proves the argument here. Its logic applies. Two masters can appear to share a house until they issue contrary commands. The choice then reveals which one rules. Apply that conflict test to marriage. The conflict of contraception. The secondary good says, keep the closeness and pleasure of the marital act now. The primary end says, accept the act's order to the child or abstain. If unity may defeat procreation, unity is primary in practice, whatever the theory says. The conflict of divorce. Adult communion fades, affection grows cold, or one spouse declares the partnership dead. The bond and the claims of children remain. If the asserted good of the spouses may defeat permanence, subjective unity again becomes the real master. The good permitted to lose has been treated as subordinate. A label cannot conceal the choice. The older rule does not demand contempt for the secondary goods. It commands that they be loved in order. Love the frosting as frosting, and it serves the cake. Make it the meal, and it displaces the thing it was meant to adorn. Part 4. Pius XIV's warning and the 1951 turn. Pius XV's 1951 address to midwives contains both a warning against personalism and the decisive modern turn. The record must be heard whole. Pius XII did warn against a grave inversion of the order of values. He reaffirmed that personal values and the spouse's happiness remain subordinated to the office of nature, the procreation and education of new life. If bodily and spiritual union were the act's primary purpose, he reasoned, the Creator would have designed the natural act differently. That warning must not be lost. The biology does not whisper. The male and female powers, their union, and the child who may arise from it disclose the act's natural order. Pleasure and personal union do not validate the act. They are validated by their place within the procreative office, but the same address also makes the decisive modern turn. Pius XII distinguishes restricting the matrimonial rite itself to infertile periods, which can invalidate consent, from restricting only the use of that rite. He then says serious medical, what the address calls eugenic, economic, and social reasons, can exempt spouses from the positive service of procreation for a long time, even for the whole marriage. Under those conditions, he concludes, observing infertile periods is indeed lawful. The official Italian text confirms the wording and structure. Those words cannot be hidden. They are the foundation of the modern grave reason defense. They are also the rupture point. The older record had spoken in the lower verbs of non-disturbance, caution, and lesser evil counsel. In 1951, the verb became conditional permission. That permission is best read as a reformable concession, not as a new description of nature. If selected sterile use is naturally ordered, no grave reason is needed to make it lawful. If it selects against the primary end, a grave circumstance may counsel abstinence, affect prudence and culpability, or explain toleration, but it cannot change the object's moral species. Pius XIV preserved the older hierarchy in his warning and opened the modern exception in his permission. Both facts belong on the record. Part 5. Changing the recipe. The later vocabulary moved further. Following the personalist turn represented in Gaudium et Spes, the 1983 Code of Canon Law, Canon 1055, removed the older words primary and secondary. It describes marriage as a covenant and partnership of the whole of life, ordered to the good of the spouses in the procreation and education of offspring. Not every word is false. Read under the older hierarchy, covenant can mean a solemn contract before God, while the good of the spouses can name charity, fidelity, mutual aid, and sanctification within the child-directed household. The weakness is the missing rank. The older canon said primary and secondary. The newer canon places the good of the spouses beside offspring and leaves their relation unstated. When those goods conflict, the interpreter must supply the hierarchy that the law no longer names. The legal problem with self-giving. The older object of consent was definite. Each spouse gave and accepted a perpetual and exclusive right over the body for acts apt for generation in 1917 Canon 1081 Prayer 2. The law could ask whether that right was exchanged, whether permanence or fidelity was excluded, and whether an impediment prevented the contract. Total self-giving is different. How much self must be delivered? If a spouse is selfish, was the gift legally incomplete? If a spouse is immature or annoying, was there no partnership of the whole of life? If affection later dies, does that prove the original gift was defective? Love is a virtue and duty. It should govern married life. It cannot be the object transferred by consent because future love cannot be measured, delivered in a fixed quantity, or adjudicated as a right. A defined bodily right can be found present or absent. Total self-gift can always be found insufficient after the fact. The omission of rank and the expansion of the object do not by themselves prove the later history. They create a legal danger. The frosting can become a validity condition for the cake. Part 6. The annulment crisis. Authentic nullity is real and must be preserved. A prior bond, a true impediment, defective form, force or grave fear, antecedent and perpetual impotence, or a real defect of consent may prevent marriage from arising. A declaration of nullity dissolves nothing. It judges that no marriage was made. The danger begins when later failure is read backward into the wedding. The spouses did not achieve mature communion, therefore they must have lacked capacity. Therefore no marriage ever existed. A failed household becomes an autopsy performed on the altar. Canon 1095 speaks of grave defects of judgment and inability to assume the essential obligations of marriage for causes of a psychic nature. Everything turns on essential obligations. If those obligations remain tied to the defined procreative contract, the canon can identify real incapacity. If they expand into an ideal of mature communion or personal fulfillment, ordinary marital failure can be redescribed as inability to marry. The older bar was deliberately low. The 1917 code required only that the parties not be ignorant that marriage is a permanent society between man and woman for the procreation of children, in Canon 1082. Nature did not reserve the common institution of the human race for psychological experts or perfectly mature adults. The numerical change was real. J. Ziegler's compilation, drawing its 2007 figure from the Vatican Statistical Yearbook of the Church, reports the following United States totals in annulment nation. The same report says the United States contained about 5.9% of the world's Catholics, but accounted for roughly 60% of the Church's 58,322 declarations in 2007. These figures prove nothing about any individual decree, and they do not prove that Canon 1055 alone caused the rise. They do prove that explosion is not rhetorical decoration. Something changed in procedure, application, legal categories, or all three. Benedict XV acknowledged the underlying danger. He warned the Roman Rota against the exaggerated and almost automatic multiplication of declarations after failed marriages and insisted that incapacity alone and not difficulty invalidates marriage in his 2009 address. Ordinary sinners can marry. Immaturity, selfishness, dead affection, and grave later failure may establish fault, justify separation, or show resisted grace. They do not by themselves prove that no bond arose. The frosting cannot become a rite whose later absence proves there was never a cake. Part 7. The Infertility Paradox. The strongest objection asks, if procreation is the primary end, what of the barren and the aged? If they produce no cake, are they unmarried? The objection mistakes outcome for orientation. An eye is ordered to sight even when blindness prevents it from seeing. In the same way, the male-female union remains the kind of union ordered to children when age or defect prevents conception. The failure is in the outcome, not in the nature of the union or the rite exchanged. The 1917 Code, Canon 1068, Par 3, therefore states that sterility neither nullifies nor impedes marriage. The spouses enter the same permanent procreative office and exchange the same right to acts apt for generation. They need not promise a successful pregnancy. Received barrenness is a circumstance. Willed sterility is a choice against the end. The aged couple does not turn age into a technique. The barren couple does not make infertility the condition for taking the act. By contrast, spouses who organize marital use around avoiding children make expected sterility part of their plan. A childless marriage can be all cake. The cake is the procreative order, not the number of slices served. Party 8. A shot across the bow, NFP as contraception. The two masters principle finally reaches natural family planning used to avoid children. NFP differs from artificial contraception in mechanism. It does not place a barrier in the act, spill the seed, or chemically suppress a faculty. That physical difference is real. The moral object is another question. NFP used to prevent conception observes the fertile days, abstains during them for that purpose, and reserves intercourse for days expected to be infertile, again for that purpose. It seeks the marital act while selecting against conception. The chart is not a condom, but both can serve a contraceptive choice. Periodic continence considered alone is not contraception because abstention uses no marital act. Timed sterility is not bare abstinence. Fertile refusal and infertile use form one coordinated method, whose purpose is to retain the act's secondary goods while avoiding its primary end. 1. The Thomistic distinction, pleasure within order and pleasure against order. Aquinas teaches that married persons come together wholly without sin for offspring or to render the marital debt and justice, in Supplement, Question 49, Article 5. He then distinguishes pleasure sought within the bounds of marriage, which he classifies as venially disordered when it becomes the motive, from pleasure sought so as to exclude the honesty of marriage, which he treats as mortal, in Article 6. Aquinas did not discuss a modern fertility chart, so the application must be argued rather than placed in his mouth. The question is whether selecting expected sterility in order to avoid offspring merely receives pleasure within marriage or acts against the good that makes the use marital. Augustine supplies the direct fertile time case. He reminds the Manichaeans that they counseled couples to observe the time when a woman was most likely to conceive and abstain then. His verdict is blunt. This showed that they approved of having a wife not for the procreation of children, but for the gratification of passion, in On the Morals of the Manichaeans, 1865. Their false religion supplied their motive, but the timetable itself is familiar. Identify fertility, abstain then, and reserve intercourse for the barren interval. Effectiveness does not create the moral object, but it reveals public function. In 2018, the United States Food and Drug Administration classified natural cycles as a fertility diagnostic, contraceptive, software application in the FDA device record. A 2014 CDC effectiveness table listed the symptothermal method at 0.4 pregnancies per 100 women during the first year of perfect use. That means 99.6% avoided pregnancy during that year under perfect use conditions, compared with 99.7% for the pill and 96% for withdrawal. The table also reported a much higher 24% typical use pregnancy rate for fertility awareness methods as a broad category. The figures must not be generalized to every method or couple. Their narrower point is enough. Carefully timed infertile day selection can function with contraceptive effectiveness comparable to methods nobody hesitates to call contraceptive. A bare 99% claim would mix methods and standards. The exact figures make the argument stronger. Advocates invoke effectiveness to prove that the system works, then invoke the occasional child conceived despite the chart to prove that it remains open to life. Failure proves fallibility, not procreative orientation. A broken condom remains a contraceptive attempt. A child conceived despite the chart does not turn the chart into a procreative plan. Hard circumstances do not change that object. They may make another child impossible to welcome, require serious aid, affect prudence and culpability, or call for continence. The traditional hard case remedy is abstinence, difficult but possible by grace, not a technique for retaining the act while avoiding the child. 2. The necessary architecture, why the hierarchy had to disappear. Keep the 1917 definition in view. If procreation and education are primary, while unity and mutual aid are secondary, then avoiding the primary end for years while deliberately retaining the secondary goods is difficult to call ordered. The equal ends grammar supplies the needed defense. If unity and the good of the spouses stand beside procreation without rank, pastors may say that the couple is still serving marriage through closeness, self-gift, and personal communion, while arranging not to serve the procreative end. The conflict test exposes the result. The good allowed to lose is the child. This does not prove that Canon 1055 was written in order to justify NFP, or that one legal phrase caused the entire culture. It makes a conceptual claim. The newer grammar gives time, sterility, and architecture the older primary and secondary order denied it. Ends became unranked goods, then unranked goods allowed the secondary to defeat the primary. This is the diet marriage point without the sugar sickness. The plan keeps the sweetness while designing away the substance. It asks for the reward of the generative act while making the absence of generation the condition for taking it. Under the cold light of the older categories, the question remains, are spouses receiving the marital act under its procreative order, or becoming skilled at eating the frosting while avoiding the cake? Conclusion: restoring the hierarchy. We must return to the wisdom of one governing end. The stability of the family depends on recognizing that the cake comes first. We value the frosting, but recognize it as the servant of the cake. We serve the true good of the spouses by serving the duties of the child-directed household. We receive sacramental grace as supernatural help to perfect the natural contract, not as a new essence that replaces it. The old hierarchy does not choose the child against the spouses. It places the spouse's goods inside the household. Their union is ordered to build. Mutual aid steadies that household. Love humanizes its sacrifices. Fidelity guards it. The remedy of concupiscence protects chastity. Grace elevates the whole office and strengthens husband and wife to carry it toward God. When frosting becomes equal to the cake, conflict makes it master. The child is excluded to preserve unity. Failed unity is used against the bond, and failed sweetness becomes evidence that no marriage ever existed. We cannot bake good marriages with a broken recipe. Put the cake first, and every secondary good recovers its rightful place.